It's time for options. Tudor is great, but what else is there that is a great alternative to a Pelagus 39, an FXD, a Black Bay, or a Pink Chrono? Tudor is not the only game in town, and I'm going to prove it. Tudor are a massive success story in an otherwise declining watch market. 12 years ago, Tudor was non-existent and sold almost nothing. They have been all the rage, and for good reason. They've had smash hits like the Tudor Black Bay 58, the Pelagos, and a whole lot more. But it doesn't mean that they're the only watches in the world, and we can have a tendency to get tunnel vision and not appreciate some of the other great watches out there that are just as exciting, just as good looking, and also just simply great. So these are my alternatives to the most popular Tudor models. Let's dive in. Our starting point is this year's Black Bay 41 Diver in monochrome for $4,400 US. It's got a thinner case, a Jubilee bracelet, and a Metis approved movement. For the price, you are getting a lot of watch for your money. It's a watch that gets the "this is what the Submariner used to be" moniker. It's got just a little bit more of a tool watch vibe, but it still has some of that dressiness of the Submariner. I'm suggesting the Omega Seamaster 300M. It's $1,500 more, which is not nothing, but the Omega is finished to a much higher level. The case is better, the dial is better, and I would argue that technically the movement is still superior despite having an inferior power reserve. As far as I'm concerned, it's a superior watch in every way. I've said before that I like the helium escape valve. I don't dive. I don't care if it's practical. I don't care if it's safer if it was an automatic valve. I just think the valve gives it a bit of a tool vibe, which I think is cool. So if there was just one place in the Tudor catalog where I would spend more to get more, this would be the place. There's also that new Daniel Craig Seamaster, which none of us knows the pricing or the specs on, but let's assume it's a no-date 40mm black Seamaster 300M with an anodized steel black bezel similar to the new No Time to Die at a price of around $6,500. I'd take that over the Black Bay any day of the week. The 41mm Black Bay is a much more modern watch, where the 54 very much reaches much more heavily into a vintage vibe. The 41mm used to have that vintage vibe as well in the first and second generations, but they've definitely taken those watches in a different direction. They've left the 54 to be more distinct in its retro styling. Oris do some great options with their Diver 65s. This is a skin diver in the way that a skin diver should be. It's incredibly well put together. It's a fabulous watch, and I feel it's the better option. The Tudor Chrono is a classic Black Bay with a chrono movement. It's wearable. It's not nearly as big as the formal dimensions would indicate. It's good looking, and the movement inside is a decent Breitling caliber that gets the job done. The starting point is around $5,500. Now, the thing you're bound to notice about Tudor is that often nothing really compares to them in terms of price. Finding a watch that precisely matches Tudor spec for spec and dollar for dollar is actually a little bit hard. There are very few models where there is a one-to-one comparison. For the monochrome diver, I went up in price because I do think it's warranted to get the Omega. For the Tudor Chrono, though, I would lead you in the opposite direction and send you towards Hanhart. Hanhart is a small German specialty watchmaker that have a model called the 417 ES. The 417 ES comes in at about half the price, which I think compared to the Tudor is a bargain. The movement in the Hanhart is a manual wind column wheel flyback chronograph, which I think is totally worth it. The case is finished really well. The dial is good looking. It's a bit more flat than the Tudor dial, but it's not a slouch whatsoever. You don't get a steel bracelet, but I see that as a plus. The Tudor Chrono is the riveted bracelet, which I don't really feel works with this specific model, and the Hanhart just begs to be worn on a NATO or a leather strap. The Hanhart is also thinner, and when it's not on the bund strap, it wears really well. I often forget the Royal simply because it's not a particularly popular Tudor model and it gets no love. The last couple of years have been the integrated sports watch years. So the 12 from CW, the PRX, Maurice Lacroix, there are a million options at a million price points, and many of them have gotten a whole lot more attention than the Royal. The Royal is also cheap, and that's because, among other things, there's a Salita movement inside. This is still not a model that has all the options with Tudor's own Kinesi movements on the inside. $2,500 or thereabouts is what you're going to pay depending on where you live. The hype alternative would be something like the Christopher Ward 12, and it's definitely worth a look. But for me, I'd actually suggest Maurice Lacroix. Maurice Lacroix barely, if ever, get mentioned in enthusiast circles. They are one of those other brands that just kind of exist, but this is actually, in my opinion, a good option. Does it have reminiscences of the Royal Oak and the Ingenieur? Sure, but the CW reminds us of those watches as well, and the Chapek Antarctique. In 39 millimeters, the Icon is a really nice watch. It's got a Celita base caliber inside. They call it something else, but that's what it is. It wears well. It's got a bit of flair due to the case and bracelet construction, but I do think it's a good looking and well put together watch for basically the same price as the Royal. The Ranger, Tudor's field watch. The newest model is a very wearable 39 millimeters. You get a classic field watch dial with Arabic numerals at 12, 3, 6, and 9. You get Photina yellow markers and a matte red seconds pointer. For a change, you get a non-riveted bracelet, and all this for under $3,000. The good thing about field watches is that finishing isn't necessarily a key selling point. Field watches are supposed to be matte with either sandblasted, brushed, or bead blasted finishing that make for a very rough and ready vibe. The dials are simple and there's not a lot of applied markers or sunray dials going on. That's why I'm comfortable with suggesting a SIN 556, which comes in at half price. There are a couple of different options, one with Arabic numerals and one with simple stick hour markers. You can select different bracelets or straps, and for the price you can throw in a couple of alternative bracelets and straps without breaking the bank. The movement isn't quite on the level of the Tudor, but it's still a workhorse Celita that will last you a lifetime and is easily serviceable. The bracelet is also not on the Tudor level, but get it on the 5-link bracelet and you're still getting a really good watch. It's a solid watch, it's built like a tank, it's good looking, and in this category you're not going to notice massive finishing differences. There's also another watch that I haven't seen in the metal, but it's from Vertex, and on paper at least, it seems like a pretty good option. I'm hoping to get my hands on that one to talk about it. The Black Bay no bezel models. Longines Conquest, no question about it. I think it's a superior watch in terms of design. It's comparable in terms of finishing and materials. It's a fabulous watch, and once again it proves to me that Longines are really on a roll. The Conquest models are just fabulous. How do you get watch nerds to have a brain aneurysm? You tease a Rolex GMT Coke bezel and then you do a bait and switch and offer them a Tudor GMT Coke bezel. Tudor did what everybody wanted, a GMT that had a smaller case than the original Black Bay GMT, with a thinner case than the Black Bay Pro, with a Metas movement and a Coke bezel. I get it. This watch ticks a ton of boxes. I would love to suggest a vintage Coke bezel Rolex, but that's not really realistic at this price point, but that would be a cool option. There's no shortage of bi-color bezel GMTs out there, but for me, this is where I bring out Longines again. Longines is likely the brand that most often gets compared with Tudor and vice versa, and I likely could have found options for every Tudor throughout the Longines catalog. And here, it's the Spirit Zulu time, preferably in 39 millimeters. There are a couple of options from the more contemporary black and grayish models to the more retro green and gold model, which is my favorite. You get a lot of watch for your money with Longines, and it's not always the case that the typically slightly higher price for the Tudor corresponds to a better finished and better put together product. Omega is better than Tudor by pretty much any production standard, but you can't always draw as clear a conclusion on Longines and Tudor. The Zulu time is a fabulous option, and also one where I would argue that there's no compromise whatsoever despite a lower price. The Black Bay Pro, essentially the Explorer 2 in a Tudor version. The aesthetically most similar option is the Hodinkee edition Longines Spirit Zulu time, but I've already used my quota of Longines watches as alternatives. So that's why I'm going for Norqain. Norqain come across as a weird brand to me. Considering the price, the quality, the investments in branding, and the Kinesi movements inside, Norqain are nowhere near as big a success as I think they would like to be. They get very little love, but I have a soft spot for two of their watches. One is their Hakuna Mipaka model, which resonates with me for no other reason than I was born in Africa and it has a shield and a cool Savannah dial. It's marketing that hits me right in the feels. The other watch from Norqain that I like is the Neverest GMT Glacier. It's not quite as restrained as the Tudor Black Bay Pro, but you get a Kinesi movement, just like Tudor models. You get a cool dial, and it's got that Explorer kind of vibe. Pelagos 39. I've been doing this YouTube thing now for about 2 years now, and one thing that I know almost always happens is that when I compare things that are priced differently, there will inevitably be somebody that gets frustrated and says, you can't compare Omega with Patek. It's apples and oranges. And I've compared an AP code 1159 with a Daniel Wellington because the dial designs, in my eyes, looked similar. Not in quality, but they looked a lot like each other. A couple of people had a meltdown about that one, but it's just not how my brain works. I recently bought a Pelagos FXD, and I was legitimately considering the FXD or a 50 Fathoms or a Seiko SPB 453. That's a massive price difference for watches that I compared with each other. To me, for the wearing situation I was looking for, those three watches were interchangeable. Either one would do. And I'm not a moron. I know there's a quality difference in terms of movements and materials and finishing, but I could have chosen either one, despite the price difference. So, with the risk of a few people having a meltdown, if someone asked me Pelagos 39 or SRPL 13, I'd legitimately say SRPL 13. No, the movement isn't close. The material isn't titanium. The bracelet is vastly inferior. But if I was looking for a tool watch with this balance of tool personality and lifestyle versatility, I wouldn't personally find the 39 compelling enough to pay the premium. There are clear compromises to be had, but it's a good looking watch. If you asked me if I wanted a Pelagos 39 over a Rolex in titanium, I would go Pelagos 39. I bought the Black Pelagos FXD, as you may know. The video's up here somewhere. I spoke about it at length, and I'll tell you which watch came in second. The only reason it came in second was there was too much red on the dial and bezel. If that wasn't there, I would have chosen it over the FXD. For the second time on the list, it's a Zin with the Zin U50 Hydro. If you've never handled a Zin, you're in for something special. They are incredibly solid. You just get that feeling that the engineers at Zin have the final say over the designers, where Tudor are ever so slightly more of an aesthetic exercise with a lot more leeway in terms of build quality, finishing, and quality control. It's not bad with Tudor at all, but Zin just want there to be no question that their watches can actually be used for their intended purpose. You might die going down to 500 meters of depth rating or however deep Zin goes, but the Zin won't. It's going to look badass, and at 2.5K it's also a fair chunk cheaper. And yes, the movement isn't on par, at least not in terms of in-house. And now there's the bracelet. It's a recurring theme for Zin, but everything else I feel is comparable. The Alinghi is just the FXD in carbon ceramic, and whenever a brand wants to build an extreme version of their watch or a sports collab version of a watch, they throw either carbon or ceramic or PVD into the mix with a dash of color. It literally doesn't matter which brand it is. Panerai have the Luna Rossa, Omega have their Dark Side of the Moons, Tag Heuer have them as well. Everybody follows this trope, and so did Tudor with the Alinghi. It's a little bit derivative, but it makes for a lot of cool options. And my favorite is the Doxa 300T. Doxa makes solid watches with their very Doxa aesthetic, and the sub 300 carbon with Caribbean dial is the watch I'm suggesting. This watch is going to get you to 300 meters. Again, you'll be dead at that pressure, but your watch will be fine. Doxa makes real dive watches. Inside, you have a COSC certified movement, just like the FXD. The Doxa 300T has a bit of a special case design, which isn't for everybody, but the advantage of the ceramic black case is that it isn't as pronounced. So I think a lot of people will gravitate towards it. The Tudor 1926 is another watch that is just a watch that Tudor has. Dress watches might be a declining market, but most brands have an option, and the 1926 is Tudor's option. I would say go for a Baltic, or get a Studio Underdog, or a Seiko Cocktail Time, or get a Nomos. The 1926 is probably the most forgettable of the Tudor models, in my opinion. It's not bad at all, but I don't feel it has a lot of character. Nomos has the whole Bauhaus thing going on, which permeates all of their designs. Studio Underdog is all in on this playful style, and the Seiko Presage watches just come across as well thought out with a clear artistic vision. The 1926 is to some extent just a simple dress watch. It's not bad, but it's not distinctive. And my personal choice would be a Tangente, or I would really go for something like Baltic, which is a lot cheaper, but it would leave me some money left over to buy a couple more to have something to choose between. You might have forgotten about the P01, but I didn't. It's a bit of a specialty watch, more I think designed as a proof of concept than intended to sell 1 million units. It's big, it's chunky, it's got this unusual bezel lock mechanism that integrates with the bracelet. For me, I just go for a Magitech from Longines. The Magitech looks nothing like a P01. It's not a diver, but it's Longines' option for specialty historical watch. The Magitech is a big boy, just like the P01. The titanium version, which just got released, is, let's just say, priced at a premium, but man, it's a cool watch. I shoehorned it in there just because I like it that much. Those were my alternatives. Like I said earlier, comparison is a bit of a weird exercise. There are very few situations where you get completely identical options where the only difference is aesthetic. A movement might be more accurate, but it might have a lower power reserve. The case might have better polish, but it will also scratch more easily. And the fact that something's Zaratsu polishing, well, is that even worth $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 more? That's because the two most important things are, what do you like and what do you value? I can't answer that question for you. All I can do is share some options because there's no such thing as best when the goal is to get something that you personally like. So what do you like? What do you think? What would you suggest? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.